Welcome to the second meeting of the research seminar, The Penetration of Arabic Philosophy into the Latin Philosophical Tradition, organized by the Aquinas and the Arabs International Working Group. I am Nicola Polloni from Durham University, and today we are going to discuss the metaphysical reflection of a quite peculiar philosopher, Dominicus Gundissalinus. During our first meeting, we have seen that Gundissalinus was active in Toledo between 1162 and 1181. We have also noticed that Gundissalinus translated more than 20 works from Arabic into Latin, predominantly writings by Muslim and Jewish philosophers, with the only exception of Alexander of Aphrodisias, the Intellectual Intellector. Finally, we had a preliminary look at Gundissalinus' original philosophical production, introducing some problems regarding Gundissalinus' authorship of some of the treatises traditionally ascribed to him. Today, we will examine the metaphysical and cosmological reflection of Gundissalinus, presented basically in two of his works, the De Unitate Uno and De Processione Mundi. Two further writings by Gundissalinus, the De Divisione Philosophiae and De Anima, will be the topic of our next meeting. Before passing to the analysis of the De Unitate Uno and De Processione Mundi, we have to consider some elements characterizing Gundissalinus' style and approach, elements that are crucial for the overall understanding of Gundissalinus' reflection. As I had the occasion to point out, the consideration of Gundissalinus' philosophical style is directly connected to the use he makes of his sources, and the analysis of this use entails the preliminary discussion of an alteration strategy as one of the typical features through which Gundissalinus develops his modus operandi. We should bear in mind the twofold role played by Gundissalinus. He is, at the same time, a translator from Arabic into Latin and the translator of many of the sources on which he bases his own philosophical reflection. By this viewpoint, the traditional problem about the interpretative freedom of the translator, or better, the hermeneutical stratification to which the translated text is exposed, finds a peculiar outcome. Gundissalinus indeed interprets the original text while translating it into Latin, and then he reinterprets the text when he uses it and quotes it in his original production. And since Gundissalinus' work are in the most part collationes of quotation, whose letter only rarely correspond to that of the sources he is quoting, the recognition of this discrepancy offers a thorny problem to the scholarship dealing with Gundissalinus. Gundissalinus' use of his sources is marked by blind quotations. In the De Processione Mundi alone, there are more than 100 direct quotations of excerpts from Arabic and Latin authors, and none of them make explicit reference to their original source. Moreover, one of Gundissalinus' most common features is to isolate sentences from the context of the original source and integrate them in a new context, often composed of a variety of isolated quoted sentences whose horizon of meaning is sensibly different from the original. In some occasion, the purpose of quoting such short sentences without displaying any relevant content is completely unclear. In other occasions, this attitude corresponds to Gundissalinus' attempt at realizing a theoretical synthesis between doctrinal cores he correctly perceived as opposite to each other. Not all the quotations presented by Gundissalinus, though, are short or melted with other textual sources. In some occasions, and basically when using materials from Avicenna's works, Gundissalinus quotes large excerpts, even entire chapters. The length of these excerpts is directly related to the doctrinal relevance they have in Gundissalinus' work. That is, the doctrinal role played by Avicenna's quotation on the three works De Processione Mundi, De Anima, and De Divisione Philosophiae. As I was saying, Gundissalinus seems to pursue, at least in some occasion, an alteration strategy while quoting his sources. The strategy is particularly evident through the consideration of the large quotation Gundissalinus makes of Avicenna's Liber de philosophia prima in his De processione mundi. Gundissalinus' quotation covers almost entirely chapters 6 and 7 of the first book of the Liber de philosophia prima. That is, through this quotation, Gundissalinus expounds Avicenna's demonstration of the unrelated oneness of the necessary existent, and then the very doctrine of necessary and possible being, upon which Gundissalinus' overall ontology is based in the De processione mundi. A vast and dense quotation in which Gundissalinus acts with creative spirit, that is, it modifies the quoted text in different ways and basically by changing the order of the paragraphs, subtly modifying the lexicon used, and altering Avicenna's line of reasoning in at least one occasion. Regarding these points, some consideration should be done. Gundissalinus, indeed, by changing the quoted text in this manifold way, is aiming at a specific purpose or purposes. In the first place, the most probable explanation of these alterations is Gundissalinus' concern regarding the consistency of the theoretical outcome of the writing he is working on. In other words, the insertion of a quoted excerpt has to meet some implicit criteria of consistency with the overall writing on which it is presented, and with the other quoted texts, and these could entail the change of some parts of the quotation. Moreover, and this is eminently displayed by Gundissalinus' De Sciences, the Toledo philosopher could not agree with some passages of the source he is using, and thus he prefers to cut those passages while quoting or translating, as in the case of the De Sciences, the source. A phenomenon that we are going to see in place with Gundissalinus' De Anima. But some further factors could be in play in such a dynamic. It could be possible that Gundissalinus found his previous translation not completely satisfactory anymore, and then he retranslated the text from the Arabic while quoting. Or Gundissalinus could just be willing to retake the original Arabic text to polish his previous translation while quoting the text in his writing, an eventuality that seems more probable. Finally, we should keep in mind that the recognition of this attitude undertakes a huge philosophical problem regarding the limits of any stemma codicum and critical edition. The sources used by Gundissalinus in his two cosmological treatises, that is, the authorities upon whom his metaphysical reflection is based, derive from both the Latin and the Arabic traditions. On the one hand, we have Boëthius, Chalcidius, Hermann of Carinthia, Thierry of Chartres, and William of Conches. These sources can be easily understood as a consistent group of authors and works directly connected to Chartres and thus with Gundissalinus' philosophical education. On the other hand, the Arabic sources used by Gundissalinus for his cosmology are mainly Ibn Gabirol, Avicenna, and Al-Ghazali, but also Abraham ibn Dawood and Al-Farabi. The latter is quite important not as a source of metaphysical or physical knowledge, but because Gundissalinus, as I had the occasion to recently point out, abstracts from Al-Farabi, Kitab Iqsa al-Ulum, a metaphysical procedure, and he pursued this procedure in details in his De processione mundi. We will come back to this point soon. As for now, let's pass to the examination of the first writing we are going to analyze today, that is, the treatise on the unity and the one. Quicquid est, ideo est, quia unum est. Anything that is, it is, since it is one, states Gundissalinus De Unitate et Uno, presenting the topic upon which the treatise is based. The writing has been edited 3 times. The first edition, produced by Correns in 1891, has been followed by Alonso Alonso's edition in 1956, and recently a new critical edition has been realized by Maria Jesús Sotobruna and Concepción Alonso de Real. The De Unitate has an interesting history of the effects, since it has circulated for some time as a pseudo-Boeotian work until when Thomas Aquinas pointed out that the author of this treatise couldn't be Boethius, for the doctrine of universal hylomorphism therein presented. Indeed, the main and almost exclusive source of Gundissalinus' De Unitate is Solomon Ibn Gabirol's Fons Vitae. The date to Ibn Gabirol's writing is striking, since Gundissalinus receives and develops from the Fons Vitae the aforementioned doctrine of universal hylomorphism and the cosmological progression of the hypostasis. The core of the De Unitate is a discussion of the metaphysical concept of unity and oneness. It is through the participation to unity that anything can be said to be one, and thus, by being one, it can be said to be. Nonetheless, Gundissalinus has to precise in what way a thing can participate of unity. This entails the problem of the ontological composition of the created being. Omne esse ex forma est, states Gundissalinus. But the form can produce the being only if it has matter to which it can be joined, and thus being, that is to say in modern terms existence, only derives from the union of matter and form, since being is the existence of form with matter. From these words, Gundissalinus' adhesion to Ibn Gabirol's universal hylomorphism is evident. Nonetheless, following Ibn Gabirol, the De Unitate explains how the concept of unity is entailed by this dynamic. Indeed, it is in the very causal bond that keeps together matter and form that unity appears as the fundamental ontological factor of existence. It is unity that allows the union of matter and form. For this reason, when there is a union of matter and form, a thing is said to exist, while when that bond is removed, the thing is dissolved, it doesn't exist anymore. Therefore, Gundissalinus can state that, I quote a Latin text, qua propter, sic ut unitate res ad esse ducitur, sic et unitate in illo esse custoditur, unde esset unum, inseparabiliter concomitantur, se et videntur esse simul natura. In itself, indeed, matter naturally tends to dispersion. Its nature is to be multiplied, divided, and fractioned. Matter is the contrary of unity, and for this reason, unity is necessary in order to establish and maintain the being of anything, since only unity can hold matter and keep it united to the form. Unity, thus, is something that always accompanies matter in being. Unity is the very form that is joined to matter, and that's why it is said that being comes out from the form, and I quote again the Latin text, ac per hoc unitas per se retinet materiam, sed quod per se retinet, non potest facere separationem. Forma er coexistens in materia, que perficit et custodit essentiam cuiusque rei, unitas est descendens a prima unitate, que creavit eam. This unity, that in the De processione mundi will be defined as the form of unity, the first form received by matter in the De Unitate et Uno, is clearly derived by the real and actual one, that is, God. It is for God's will that any created thing is one, since he is the actual one and real unity. And so everything tends to be one and to join the one, since everything desires to be and they can be only by being one. The first created unity is caused by the real unity. Nonetheless, since every cause has to be different from its cause, while the actual unity is eternal, immutable, and alien to any diversity, the derived unity has to suffer multiplicity, diversity, and mutability. In other words, the created unity has to be joined to matter, the principle of multiplicity and change. But matter is not the same everywhere. In its separation from its cause, that is, from God, matter suffers a kind of thickness and differentiation. Where it is closer to its cause, matter is subtle and simple, and unity can join it in a strong union, as in the celestial beings that are indivisible in act and perpetual. In other regions of existence, farther from its cause, matter is thicker and weaker, and unity can hardly keep its union with matter. By this, the lowest things are weak in existence, and they suffer generation and corruption. Gundissalinus presents this dynamic of ontological degradation through the metaphors of the water that descends from its spring and becomes obscure and thick in the marshes and ponds, and that of the light that is weakened in its separation from the source of light, the latter refer to the progressive weakening of unity in its union with matter. This ontogonic dynamic explains the cosmological progression of the hypostasis through various hylomorphic unions. Gundissalinus presents the same progression expounded by Ibn Gabirol in his Fons Vitae. The first created being is the intelligence, whose matter and form are simple and essentially indivisible. This unity is multiplied in the following hypostasis: the soul, which suffers a certain degree of change and diversity, and this in a progression characterized by more and more multiplicity and change through the following hypostasis up to the matter bearing the quantity, that is, the sensible matter, the thickest of all matters. Finally, the De Unitate ends with two digressions. The first one explains the different meanings of the term unity beside the ontological sense of the present discussion: unity per accidens, as aggregation, as number, as proportion or analogy, etc. The final paragraph is then dedicated to the demonstration that discrete and continuous unities derive from the same concept of unity. As you can see, the treatise in itself is a quite meager description of the ontological value of unity, based on Ibn Gabirol's Fons Vitae and a few other sources with a minor impact on Gundissalinus' discussion. Regarding the reception of Ibn Gabirol's philosophy, we have to notice the complete absence of another very famous doctrine formulated by Ibn Gabirol, with a brilliant history of the effects. I mean, the doctrine of divine will. The reason of this absence is quite simple. Gundissalinus' focus here is centered on unity only, and God is basically taken into account as oneness and actual unity. As I said before, two are the doctrines received and developed here by Gundissalinus: universal hylomorphism, in base of which every created being is composed by matter and form, and the hypostatical progression exposed by Ibn Gabirol and articulated into intelligence, soul, nature, the matter which bears quantity, and finally the corporeal world. Gundissalinus' description presents a dynamic apparently quite simple. Being is derived by the union of matter and form unity, and through the progressive separation from their cause, matter degenerates and becomes thick, while form unity becomes weaker in its unitive ontogonic action upon matter. This dynamic is derived by Ibn Gabirol and suffers a certain degree of simplification in the De Unitate, in which, of course, one can easily detect an implicit adhesion to the doctrine of the plurality of substantial forms. We will come back to this point later. Indeed, nonetheless, as often happens, the devil is in the details. Indeed, a crucial problem arises from Gundissalinus' cosmological discussion. Is there one or many matters? In the De Unitate, Gundissalinus tends to refer to one matter, but then he states that nam quia aliquid materia et spirituale, et aliquid eius corporale, est aliquid eius purum et lucidum, et aliquid eius est spissum et obscurum. The problem of the unicity of plurality of matter can be seen as secondary, but it isn't. Indeed, if matters are many, one should ask what is the principle of their multiplicity, since matter cannot exist without form, and form cannot be the principle of the multiplicity of matter, since it is the principle of its unity. Apparently, the solution could be the recognition of the degrading dynamic suffered by matter, which tends to multiplicity. It is the principle of multiplicity indeed, or better, we could consider the progressive weakening of form unity in its separation from its cause as the main factor of lack of unity and then multiplicity. But while this is clearly stated in the text, It is all the same referred to the multiplicity of beings, that is, of the conjunction of matter and form, and not to matter in itself. Clarification of what Gundissalinus had in his mind is provided by a clue and a passage from further treatise. The clue is the reference to the matter which bears the quantity, an extremely peculiar, dense and difficult point of the second book of the Fons Vitae. The passage from another treatise by Gundissalinus is taken by his De Anima. In his psychological treatise, and I'm sorry for the spoiler, Gundissalinus presents with further arguments his universal hylomorphism applied to the human soul and the spiritual celestial beings. There, he explains that, I quote the Latin text, et notandum quia post primam universalem id quod est materia posteriorum forma est priorum, et quod est manifestius forma est occulti, quia materia quo propinquior et sensui et similior forme et ideo fit manifestior propter evidentiam forme et occultationem materie quam visit materia forme sensibilis. The problematic reference to materia and materie in the De Unitate et Uno is made clear by this passage from the De Anima, written a few years after the De Unitate. The plurality of matters is indeed explained by Gundissalinus' acceptation of the extremely problematic doctrine of the functional circularity of matter and form expounded in the Fons Vitae. Ibn Gabirol affirms, indeed, that, I quote from Lomakis' translation, according to this, the corporeality of the world, which is manifest matter sustaining the form that is sustained in it, must be a form sustained by a hidden matter about which we are speaking, and according to this consideration, this matter will be a form for that which follows, until we will come to the first matter that contains all things. The functional circularity of the hylomorphic components is clear. What is the form of the higher degree of reality is the matter in the lower level, and thus what is the matter of the lower degree of reality is the form of the higher level. In Ibn Gabirol's example from the second book of the Fons Vitae, the upper hypostatic level is composed of the universal spiritual matter and the form of corporeality. This very form is the corporeal matter of the lower level, to which the sensible forms are joined. This dynamic, as Ibn Gabirol states, is valid for all degree of the created reality, from the first union of matter and form to the corporeal sensible world. Now, Gundissalinus clearly accepts this perspective in his first works, the De Anima, where this doctrine is expounded, and the De Unitate, whose discussion seems to be grounded on this point. The functional circularity of matter and form, indeed, seems to explain the oscillation between materia and materie, for the turning of form into matter provides a perspectival consideration of various forms and matters. To put it in other words, the matter of the level A and the matter of the level B are two different matters, for the matter of level B corresponds to the form of level A and not to its matter. In this way, the plurality of matters is grounded in the plurality of forms. Does this doctrine actually resolve the problem of the multiplicity of matter? The answer is no, evidently. Indeed, while there is no ontological correspondence between matter and form of the different levels of reality, there is no justification or even assertion of the multiplication of matters from the first matter. The different matters are the materialization of the form of the upper level, and thus matter in itself, besides this process of materialization of forms, can be said only in reference to prime matter. This is a thorny problem that is connected to the limits of the Latin version of the Fons Vitae as brilliant. At the very same time, the doctrine presented by Gabirol and Gundissalinus with him is exposed to a serious theoretical problem. As I had occasion to point out, the functional circularity of the hylomorphic components entails the non-intrinsic functional determination of matter and form. In other words, by stating that the form of the upper level is the matter of the lower, Ibn Gabirol implicitly determines both matter and form through the external function they serve, and not by an intrinsic determination of their being. In this way, we should talk about material and formal functions rather than talk about matter and form, since a being X is said to be matter only when it serves the function of matter, and the very same being X is said to be form when it serves the function of form. And in a strict Gabirolian perspective, these functions are basically the material function of bearing the form and the formal function of being born by matter. There is no need to stress how problematic are the consequences of all this. This is not the right place in which we can deal with the many problems of doctrinal consistency and hermeneutical meaning of Ibn Gabirol's Fons Vitae. Quoting the new American president, we could just say that this is a horrible mess. And Gundissalinus' first acceptation of Ibn Gabirol's Ontology and Cosmology will be problematized through his philosophical production, and in his De Processione Mundi, as we are going to see, Gundissalinus proposes a quite different ontology for the main problem he wished to resolve through universal hylomorphism, that is, the ontological difference between creature and creature. In his Emunah Ramah, Abraham ibn Dawood, Gundissalinus' collaborator to the translation of Avicenna's corpus, states regarding Ibn Gabirol, I quote from Samuelson's translation, "Also we understood the treatise of Rabbi Solomon Ibn Gabirol, may he be remembered for a blessing, in which he aimed at bestowing benefit from philosophy for the same purpose. Since he imagined that he could introduce a demonstration when demonstrations could not be introduced, he multiplied demonstrations, thinking that many demonstrations that are not true can stand in the place of one true demonstration. I would not deprecate his words were it not for the fact that he spoke what is a great perversion against the nation. Whoever understood this treatise knows this. All of that treatise shows the weakness of his grade in philosophy, and he gropes in it like groping in the dark." Ibn Dawood's philosophical work, by his very admission, is centered on overtaking this great perversion presented by Gabirol in his Fons Vitae, as well as on exceeding the limits of Saadia Gaon's reflection through the demonstration of the accordance between Jewish faith and philosophy. The Emunah Ramah thus does not spare attacks and criticisms against the ontology presented by Ibn Gabirol, and particularly the errors of his hylomorphic theory. What is absolutely surprising is to read these pages bearing in mind Gundissalinus' precocious adhesion to universal hylomorphism, and think on these two philosophers working together in what Charles Burnett called the Gundissalinus circle. It would have been even more surprising if their opposed perspectives would have not had any kind of reciprocal influence. And indeed, this is not the case. By a certain viewpoint, one could correctly say that Gundissalinus' De Processione Mundi is a kind of response to Ibn Dawood criticism against the ontological perspective baked by Gundissalinus in his De Unitate and De Anima. Besides Menendez y Pelayo, first edition of the text, two critical editions of the De Processione Mundi have been produced. The first one has been realized by Georg Bülow in 1925, and it has been followed by the new critical edition by Maria Jesús Sotobruna and Concepción Alonso de Real in 1999. The invisible aspects of God can be known through the consideration of what has been caused since the creation of the world, claims Gundissalinus at the very beginning of the De Processione Mundi, quoting Paul's letter to the Romans. Indeed, says Gundissalinus, if we look scrupulously at the visible things, we can grasp something of those invisible aspects of God, His power, His wisdom, and His goodness. In order to do so, we have to consider three things that are the composition of beings, their disposition, and their cause. The human being is able to intelectively know all these three characteristics, and thus gradually the human mind ascends to God through its contemplation, while divine goodness descends to man. And in this way, per eaque facta sunt, invisibilia Dei intellecta creatura mundi conspicit, cum ratio ad compositionem accedit hoc modo. The existence of God as first cause is established through four demonstrations. The first one is centered on the elements. Every sensible being is composed of elements, but some of them are characterized by their movement downwards, others by a movement upwards. Thus, if the existence of a cause composing their contrariety would not be admitted, it would be impossible to admit a composition between opposite things, and then a composer of contrariety is necessary, and it is the first cause. The second demonstration is similar to the first one, but is focused on the hylomorphic composition. Every corporeal being is composed of matter and form, but these components have opposed properties, contrary to each other. Therefore, an external cause composing them is necessary. The third proof considers generation and corruption. Every composed being is resolved into what composed it, and comes to be through what composed it. Nonetheless, it is impossible that something begins to be by itself, but it is necessary an external cause causing the existence of what is possible and the inexistence of what is impossible. Finally, the fourth and final proof is based on the movement through potency and act. Since the passage from potency to act is a kind of movement, one must suppose the existence of a mover which acts as the efficient cause of that being, since nothing can be the efficient cause of itself. Therefore, there must be an external efficient cause, and, avoiding a regress to infinite, one must admit the existence of an efficient cause of every caused being. These four proofs demonstrate the existence of an external cause for the composition and thus the existence of every composed being. As we know from the De Unitate, through the recognition of a cause of every composed being, Gundissalinus means the admission of a cause for every created being for the implications of the theory of universal hylomorphism. God is then the efficient cause of everything, the prime mover that, echoing Boëtius, est prima et simplex causa, quae cum sit in motas, cunctis alis movendi est causa, dedicitur stabilis quia manens dat cuncta moveri. The immobility, that is, immutability, of the first cause implies its perfection and complete and perfect actualization. Indeed, Gundissalinus says, if God would move, that movement would be finalized to the reception of a perfection of which it would be lacking, and thus to the actualization of a potentiality not actualized in him. This is inadmissible. God is the unmoved cause of movement, constantly identical to itself, and therefore opposed to its effect, in which any movement and any distinctions reside. This consideration of God as self-sufficient leads to the fundamental characterization of the first cause that Gundissalinus presents in his De processione mundi. This is the first pillar upon which Gundissalinus' overall metaphysical reflection is based, and constitutes the crucial point of advance in comparison to his previous positions. This pivotal point is the characterization of God as necessary existent, and thus Gundissalinus' adhesion to Avicenna's model ontology. As you know, this fascinating theory is based on the distinction between necessary and possible being. The possible being is what can be, but always requires a cause of its existence, for nothing can be the efficient cause of itself. This cause is the necessary being, or necessary existent, uncaused cause of everything, which resolve the structural ontological ambiguity of the possible being that can either be or not be, causing its existence. In this way, the possible being becomes a mediated necessary being, a necesse esse per aliud, that is, thanks to its cause. Now, in Avicenna, this doctrine is insolubly bound to the crucial distinction between essence and existence, and the inapplicability of such distinction to the necessary existent. And one should notice that this doctrine, which will be crucial for the subsequent medieval philosophers, is completely absent from Gundissalinus' discussion. On the contrary, Gundissalinus eagerly accepts the theory of necessary and possible being, but his attention is centered on further issues, as we are going to see. As I mentioned before, Gundissalinus presents Avicenna's model ontology through a large quotation covering chapters 6 and 7 of the first book of Avicenna's Liber de philosophia prima. Through this quotation, Gundissalinus presents the 5 proofs of the unrelated uniqueness and oneness of the necessary existent. Thanks to these demonstrations, and again quoting Avicenna, Gundissalinus can finally state that, I quote the Latin text, constat ergo quod necesse esse neque est relativum, neque est mutabile, nec multiplex, sed solitarium cum nihil aliud participat in suo esse, quod est ei proprium. Et hoc non est nisi solus Deus, qui est prima causa et primum principium omnium, quod unum tantum necesse est intelligi, non duo vel plura. With the description of God as necessary existent, Gundissalinus completes the first part of the Farabian metaphysical procedure he is applying. Following this scheme, he will now redescend to the analysis of the created beings after having ordered a new perspective through which it will now be possible to analyze the visible creation. What Gundissalinus has earned from the first part of his discussion is quite simple. It is the position of the ontological difference between creator and creatures in the terms of composed versus composer, cause versus caused, and possible versus necessary. Besides the very demonstration of God's unrelated uniqueness, the core of Gundissalinus' exposition is the ontological difference between possibile esse, necesse esse per se, and necesse esse per aliud. As I said before, this is the first pillar upon which Gundissalinus' reflection is based. The second one is universal hylomorphism. Gundissalinus dedicates dense pages to the discussion of how matter and form are the ontological constituents of every caused being. Nonetheless, the universal hylomorphism presented in the De processione mundi is different from what Gundissalinus expounded in his De unitate and De anima. In the De processione, there are no references to the functional circularity of matter and form. There is no unspoken implication of any non-intrinsic determination of the hylomorphic components. There is no mention of the matter which sustains quantity, not anymore. It is a polished, problematized, and developed version of universal hylomorphism, possibly not less disseminated of implicit problems, but all the same, Gundissalinus' desire to improve his ontology is striking. And this desire is achieved through the fusion between Avicenna's and Ibn Gabirol's ontology. Let me try to summarize Gundissalinus' line of reasoning in a simple and clear way through this scheme of identifications. As we have seen, the ontological difference between God and creature is expressed by the cause-cause dynamic and the distinction between necessary and possible being. The possible being is always caused. Any causative process is always the actualization of a potency. Thus, the possible being is the being in potency, and the necessary being per aliud is the being in act, while the necessary being per se is the efficient cause, act without previous potency in theory of Chartres' words. At the very same time, as Gundissalinus could easily find in Avicenna, every possible being is characterized by a structural ontological duplicity, that of essence and existence, and, more importantly, the duplicity of its own possibility and the necessity received from its cause. Gundissalinus uses this doctrinal point and replaces this duplicity with another structure, that exposed by Ibn Gabirol's hylomorphic theory. As we have seen, At the very beginning of his discussion, Gundissalinus presents God as composing an efficient cause. These are two aspects of one causative process. It is by composing matter and form that God causes the actual being, that is, the existence of any single thing. It is through the union of matter and form, both characterized by a potential being, that them and their compound receive the actual being. For Gundissalinus, matter and form thus are the ontological structure of the potential possible being, and thanks to their union, the compound is actualized and becomes a mediated necessary being, a necesse esse per aliud. One could easily criticize Gundissalinus' approach as simplistic and ingenuous, or could notice how violent is Gundissalinus' appropriation of Avicenna's doctrine and their fusion with Ibn Gabirol's without caring of Avicenna's explicit denial of any universal hylomorphism. There is no doubt that these criticisms would be right. Gundissalinus' attempt is indeed simplistic and even ingenuous, but nonetheless he is trying to solve a specific problem, and in doing this he probably thought to be consistent with the tradition. On the one hand, Gundissalinus is facing the unsolved problem of the composition of spiritual substances discussed by theory of Chartres. On the other hand, he could find in Al-Ghazali and the very Ibn Dawood some hold for his theories, or at least recognize that they shared a common ground with him, while reading what Al-Ghazali is stating in the Summa Theoricae, translated by the very Gundissalinus, that, I quote the Latin text, omne vero esse quod non est necesse esse est accidentale quiditati. Unde opus est quiditate ad hoc ut esse sit ei accidentale. Igitur secundum considerationem quiditatis erit possibile essenti, et secundum considerationem cause erit necesse essendi, eo quod ostensum est, quod quicquid possibile est in se, necesse est propter aliud a se. Abet igitur duo juditia scilicet necessitatem uno modo, et possibilitatem alio modo. Ipsum, igitur secundum quod est possibile est in potentia, et secundum quod est necesse est in effectu. Possibilitas vero est ei ex se, et necessitas ex alio a se. Est igitur in eo multitudo unius quidem quod est simile materie, et alterius quod est simile forme. Quod autem est simile materie est possibilitas, et quod est simile forme est necessitas, quest ei ex alio a se. Al-Ghazali explicitly bonds the structural duplicity of the possible being to hylomorphism, stating that its possibility is like matter and its necessity is like form, in a discussion based on the comparison between matter and potency and form and act. But even more striking is Ibn Dawood's Munarama, where the Jewish philosopher, while dealing with spiritual composition, criticizes Ibn Gabirol, stating that, I quote Samuelson's translation, rather the dependence of the intellect's existence on something else indicates that it does not have in itself what is necessary to existence. Rather, it has what is possible of existence. Thus, in its substance there is what is complex for the intellect, and it is like a composite of matter and form. The reason for this is that what it has from its substance is like matter, that is, possibility, and what it has from something else is like form. The thing that it contains is what it is, that is, necessity. Of the many substances that contain this attribute, some are ordered by others of them in order. They are the entities for whom Ibn Gabirol, may he be remembered for a blessing, tried to establish the existence of Eule and form in the 5th book of this treatise. He did not explain what they have is something like Eule and something like form. Rather, he ordained that they have matter and form, and when he tried to establish this, he could not do it. Gundissalinus resolves this ambiguity by the simple admission that matter doesn't imply corporeality, but only actual existence in its union with the form. The decorporealization of matter allows him to abandon the position of assimilarity of the structural duplicity of spiritual substance to matter and form, and state that duplicity is truly made of matter and form. Is this sufficient to resolve the oppositions, tensions, and unanswered problems deriving from the fusion between Avicenna's and Ibn Gabirol ontologies in the De Processione Mundi? The answer is no, absolutely. On the contrary, Gundissalinus' treatise is crammed with unexplained points and doctrinal strains, and possibly this is what makes the De Processione Mundi so fascinating in Gundissalinus' brave and curious attempt. But this is not the right circumstance in which we can discuss the many problems arising from Gundissalinus' cosmological treatise, and I beg your pardon for not being more specific regarding this and further points. Model ontology and universal hylomorphism. There is a third pillar, though, upon which the De Processione Mundi is grounded, a new cosmological description realized through the development of Hermann of Carinthia De Sensis. This new cosmology is extremely important. Indeed, it is Gundissalinus' solution to the problems regarding the multiplicity of matter we have seen in the De Unitate. Let me introduce it with a scheme. At the beginning, there is the creation of matter and form. Both the ontological constituents are eternally present in God's wisdom and essence, but with their own potential being that is actualized through their union in the first compound. This process is logically divided into two moments: the creation of matter and form, that is, their coming to be, and their union, that is, the primaria compositio, or first composition. When matter is only one, there is a plurality of forms that join matter. The first of them are the form of unity and the form of substantiality, and their union with matter gives the unspecified substance that receives the forms of spirituality and corporeality that cause the spiritual and corporeal substances. All this is the primaria compositio, and the outcomes of this causal dynamic are three first species of creatures, called primaria genitura, that are caused directly by God and thus are perpetual: the angelic creatures, the celestial spheres, and the elements. One should notice that the distinction between creatio and primaria compositio is ontological and not ontical. Indeed, matter and form have an actual being only into the hylomorphic compound, and Gundissalinus clearly claims that the first actual beings are the three species of the primaria genitura, caused by the dynamic of material information by the first forms called primaria compositio. This primaria genitura performs the secondary causation in the cosmic instauration. Indeed, the angels move the celestial spheres and daily create new souls. The spheres, through their movement, create the mixture of which the sublunary bodies are composed. And finally, the elements, or better the force which order them, that is, nature, operates the alterations of the corporeal beings. Thanks to this interdependent dynamic, the primaria genitura performs the secundaria compositio and the generatio of all the following beings, characterized by a temporal duration marked by generation and corruption. After having exposed the description of how the universe came to be, Gundissalinus can finally state, I quote from Lomarch's translation, "In this way, therefore, the constitution of the whole world proceeded from being nothing to being impossibility, and from being impossibility to being in act, and from being in act to corporeal and incorporeal being. And all this happened simultaneously, not in time. For reason required that the institution of the whole world should proceed in this way, namely, that matter and form were, first of all, created from nothing, and then from matter and form the elements and the other things discussed before were composed, and finally from the mixing and changing of the elements all the things composed of the elements were generated. Reason, that is, required first of all the first simple things should be made from nothing by creation, and that from the simple things composed things should be made by the first union of the simple things, and then that from the composed things the things composed of the elements should be made by generation. And in this way a progression was made from nothing to simple things, and from simple things to composed things, and from composed things to generated things. It is a demonstration of the completeness of God's instauration of the world, the final part of Gundissalinus' application of Alfarabi's metaphysical procedure. The De Processione Mundi then ends with two series of numerological identification that aims at corroborating, through a different approach, that there is no lack or superfluity in the divine action. Differently from God's instauration of the world, my presentation of Gundissalinus' metaphysical reflection suffered many lacks and possibly also superfluities. As I mentioned before, the treatise offers many tensions and unsolved problems that necessarily lie beyond this first approximation to Gundissalinus' metaphysics and cosmology. The short introduction to Gundissalinus' metaphysical speculation made clear, hopefully, the theoretical syncretism, the philosophical acumen, and the peculiar aims of Gundissalinus' activity. He tried to contribute to the global renovation of Latin philosophical debate, a debate that was going to undertake an overall change of paradigm, leaving apart the Platonism of the 11th and 12th century for a new speculative perspective centered on Aristotle and his main commentators, Avicenna and Averroes. Gundissalinus' contribution to this theoretical shift is very important and developed in a twofold way. On the one hand, indeed, the translating activity pursued by Gundissalinus made available to the Latin audience texts whose relevance is undeniable for the subsequent Aristotelization of medieval philosophy, with permanent consequences on the reflection of many philosophers like Grosseteste or Bacon. On the other hand, with his writings, Gundissalinus tried to fill the gaps he saw in the Latin philosophical framework in which he received his education, and thus in the first place Chartres. He tried to exceed the limits of the Timaic Platonism, criticizing the doctrine of primordial chaos in a Gabirolian basis, refusing the theory of the demiurge following Avicenna's doctrine of necessary being, revising the cosmological Platonism of Hermann of Carinthia by putting them under a crypto-Aristotelian natural lens. We will see this very same effort at work on Gundissalinus' elaboration of a new articulation of science when he proposes a new system of knowledge that could be able to integrate the new disciplines whose knowledge was made available thanks to the translation movement, and to ground all the sciences under the authority of metaphysics. This process of absorption and renewal is developed through two tendencies. The first one is the justification of the new doctrines by displaying their consistency with the Latin tradition. In this sense, it is curious to observe how the Latin tradition provides the hermeneutical condition by which the Arabic texts find their understanding, and these Arabic texts will provide the very same hermeneutical condition by which Aristotle will be integrated in the Latin tradition. The second aspect characterizing this process is the doctrinal agglutination of the new sources, an agglomeration of doctrines and theories that are quite often in open opposition to each other. At the same time, the outcome of the unlikely philosophical merging realized by Gundissalinus is a quite consistent philosophical speculation, where the different impressions and influences of the Latin and Arabic sources are balanced and posited in a new theoretical framework, in which the Gabirolian universal Hylomorphism and the Avicennian model ontology can stand together because they are subsumed into a new system of thought. Passed often into silence or just named as a translator or a writer of colaciones, Gundissalinus' role in the 12th and 13th century landscape, on the contrary, is extremely meaningful. Many of his contributions to the history of philosophy will be enduring, and Gundissalinus' influence is relevant for many authors such as Roger Bacon, John Peckham, or Albert of Cologne. I hope I've been able to show you at least some glimpses of the intriguing mind of this Toledan philosopher, to whom the third session of this research seminar will be again dedicated, this time focusing our attention on Gundissalinus' psychology and epistemology. Thank you for your time.